The Loveliest of Trees by A. E. Houseman. Loveliest of trees, the cherry now is hung with bloom along the bough, and stands about the woodland ride, wearing white for Eastertide. Now of my 60 and 10, 20 will not come again, and take from 70 springs a score, it only leaves me 50 more. And since to look at things in bloom 50 springs are little room, about the woodlands I will go, to see the cherry hung with snow. So this poem by A. E. Houseman, I like this poem because it's a lot of fun, because I think it dispels a few of the stereotypes about poetry. Sometimes people think of nature poetry as being, some person sort of sitting out in nature somewhere and looking at a tree and telling 101 reasons why the tree is beautiful. Well, that doesn't really describe a whole lot of what real poetry is about, but that's sort of the stereotype of nature poetry. And a lot of times with nature poetry, and this is certainly a poem about nature, I think it has to do with not just looking at nature and the beauty of nature, but maybe some reflection of human nature in nature, because humans really are part of nature. So let's take a look at this poem. It's actually kind of fun. Loveliest of trees, the cherry now. All right, so we know that the tree he's talking about is a cherry tree, is hung with bloom along the bough, and stands about the woodland ride, wearing white for Eastertide. Now, you have to know a little bit about cherry trees in order to understand what that stanza is all about. Cherry trees in the springtime bloom, and they have a lot of flowers, a lot of blooms. When I was growing up, I had two big cherry trees in my front yard, and the white blooms would just billow all over the place. They would, the trees would be covered with these white cherry blossoms, and they would fall off the trees, and it would look like the ground was covered with snow. There were so many of them. So we're really not talking about snow here necessarily, but maybe something that looks like snow. It's the cherry now is hung with bloom along the bough, and stands about the woodland ride, wearing white for Eastertide. And so there's a lot of indication here that this stanza is a reference to springtime, because that is the time period when cherry trees have their blooms. And also wearing white for Eastertide, and we know that Eastertide is just a kind of a fancy word for Easter, and that's about the time that cherry trees do bloom and have these big white blossoms coming out. And stands about the woodland ride, and you may not know what a woodland ride is, but it actually is a name for a horse trail. So these cherry trees are along the horse trail, and a lot of times in poetry you see a trail or a road being used as a metaphor for a journey, or a trip, somebody's life, going along the pathway of life. That's not an uncommon metaphor, just in common conversation, but even more so in poetry. So this is what we have. We have the setting being established, or the visual imagery being established, and we know that it is springtime, and we know that it's out in nature, and it's along a trail. So some very common poetic images being used here. A lot of times in poetry, time is, authors like to play around with time elements, just like we do in our normal conversation. Springtime could be seen as the springtime of somebody's life, and we do that a lot. Even in our casual conversation, we'll say that somebody's a day can be a metaphor for a lifetime, or a year can be a metaphor for a lifetime. We do that when we go to New Year's Eve parties and we see the old man dressed up, and he's the old year, and he's going out, and the baby New Year is coming in. So we'll come back to that time reference in just a little bit. But let's take a look at the middle stanza, because it's kind of fun. There's a riddle involved and some math involved in this middle stanza. Now of my 60 and 10, 20 will not come again, and take from 70 springs a score, it only leaves me 50 more. Okay, that looks really complicated, but let's just unpack that a little bit and see what we come up with. A score is 20 years. So if you're familiar with Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, you probably remember him starting out by saying 4 score and 7 years ago, and that would be 87 years, right? 4 score plus 7. In this case, we have 3 score, so 3 times 20 would be 60, and 10. So we're adding 10 to 60. Now we have 70 years. So of my 70 years, 20 will not come again. And take from 70 springs a score, it only leaves me 50 more. So the big question here in the middle stanza is, how old is the speaker? Well, I've heard people say all kinds of different things about this and try to figure out the math. And usually people say, well, the speaker is 50 years old, because if you take 20 from 70, you end up with 50. But I think a better answer is that the speaker is 20 years old. And let me explain that. So of my 3 score years and 10, that would be 70 years. And so the speaker expects to live about 70 years. Well, this poem was written in the around the turn of the century, actually late 1800s, not quite into 1900 quite yet. And so at the time, the average lifespan for a man would have been around 70 years old. It's slightly longer than that now. So the speaker is expecting to live about 70 years. 20 will not come again. So if 20 will not come again, that means that he's lived 20 years. And so take from 70 springs a score. If you take 20 away from 70, it only leaves me 50 more. So in other words, the speaker is 20 years old. He expects to live 70, which leaves him 50 more years. And you would think that, at the age of 20, 20-year-olds are pretty young, and young people tend to think that they're going to live forever. They don't really quite get the whole concept that, a lifetime is actually a finite term. It seems so far away when you're that age that it seems like it doesn't even matter, because it's so far away. But this person has kind of a different attitude about this. He said, it only leaves me 50 more. I've only got 50 more years to live. So quite a bit of a different attitude from most young people, I would say. And so let's take a look at the last stanza. And of course, the last stanza is going to be really important because it ties together everything else in the poem. And since to look at things in bloom, 50 springs are little room. About the woodlands I will go to see the cherry hung with snow. Okay, so we see the last stanza in the middle, or the last line in the middle stanza saying it only leaves me 50 more. So he's kind of has the attitude that 50 years really isn't much time. And that idea is reiterated in the last stanza. And since to look at things in bloom, 50 springs are little room. So again, 50 years is not much time. To do what? To look at things in bloom. Okay, so you think he's going to spend 50 years riding around looking at cherry blossoms for, all that time? I kind of think not. There are lots of other things going on that, he could be doing. And after, so long of looking at actual cherry blossoms, you think he'd be tired of doing that and would want to move on to other things. So I'm kind of guessing that looking at things in bloom might just be a metaphor for something else. So we'll come back to that in just a minute. So he doesn't have much time. So about the woodlands he will go to see the cherry hung with snow. All right. Kind of looks to me like this person saying that, he doesn't have much time. And this looks to me like one of those Carpe Diem poems, seize the day. And if you're familiar with the movie Dead Poets Society, Carpe Diem is a phrase that you see and hear being used a lot throughout that throughout that movie. And carpe diem means seize the day. It means get out there and live life to the fullest, see everything there is to see, do everything there is to do. Get out there and see the beauty of the world. There's so much to do and so little time in which to do it. So this, I think, definitely qualifies as a carpe diem kind of a poem. And so to look at things in bloom, I think, is kind of a metaphor for getting out there and living life to the fullest. So about the woodlands I will go to see the cherry hung with snow. So he's going to get on his horse. He's going to ride down the trail. Again, that trail, that path, that road is often a metaphor for a lifetime. So he's going to get on his horse and he's going to go out there and see and do, as much as he can do, and to soak up life, to the fullest. So let's go back and take a look at a few other things here. First of all, the rhythm and the rhyme of this poem, is very pronounced. As I was reading the poem, I caught myself getting caught up in the rhythm. Loveliest of trees, the cherry now is hung with bloom along the bough and stands about the woodland ride, wearing white for Eastertide. It's almost hard to not get caught up in that sing-song kind of rhythm and rhyme. And, sometimes authors use these to create a really kind of a lighthearted tone. And, if you think of what other types of poems have a really pronounced rhythm pattern and a rhyme scheme, it's generally nursery rhymes, right? Those are the first poems that we have experience with when we're little kids. And this sounds a lot like it could be a nursery rhyme. So it has that kind of really positive, upbeat, bouncy rhythm to it, a lot like a child would read in a nursery rhyme. So I think this really, the rhythm and the rhyme really contributes to the positive tone. And I would say it's, to be more specific, an optimistic tone. Again, sort of contrary to what a lot of people think. A lot of people like to sit around and kind of waste their lives away and, sleep in and just watch TV, play video games, eat snacks, just chill out, which there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a time to get out and do things too. You have to think about how much you're missing out on if you just chill out and do nothing. And I know in the Buddhist religion and in the Zen philosophy, there is, one of the greatest sins a person can commit is to waste a moment of your life. So this really sounds like it fits very nicely in with that philosophy. Get out there and live life to the fullest. It's springtime. This person is in the springtime of his life. He's 20 years old. And, at the age of 20, you might think, oh, well, I've got all the time in the world, so I can just chill out and do whatever I want. I've got time to burn. But this person has a much more sort of a go-get-em type of a carpe diem attitude towards life. I'd only have 50 more years to go, so I better get out there and make the most of everything. All right, so that is The Loveliest of Trees by A.E. Houseman. Hope you enjoyed the poem. It's kind of fun, but I think it also gives us an example of a lot of different things that we can look at in poetry that makes poetry interesting and worth reading, and it might tell us a little bit of something about what we should be doing to enjoy our lives. So good luck with the poem. See you later. Bye-bye.